Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into something super practical today? We're tackling project budgets.
And I know, not the most exciting topic at first glance, right?
You'd think so, but honestly, this stuff is the backbone of any successful project, especially when you're talking big budgets, millions even.
Absolutely. Whether you're the one actually making the budget or just need to understand how it impacts your work, this is essential stuff.
Couldn't agree more. So, we've been digging into this World Insider article, Mastering Project Budgets, and let me tell you, it's dense.
Packed with insights, though. We're going to cut through to the good stuff, the stuff you can actually use.
Exactly. And one of the first things that jumped out, the article doesn't mess around, it gets right to. There's no one-size-fits-all budget solution.
Nope, not at all. You've got your fixed budgets, flexible, even something called zero-based budgeting.
Right, and while those are all important, the one that really grabbed my attention, especially thinking about our listeners in software, is the priority-based budget. Ever had to work with limited resources.
Happens all the time.
So this budgeting approach forces you to really prioritize, rank those project goals by importance.
Which is harder than it sounds, by the way.
Yeah.
You're making trade-offs, sometimes tough ones, to make sure you're maximizing impact with what you've got.
Totally. And the article had this great example, software development team building a mobile app. Initially, they wanted all the bells and whistles, every feature possible.
Classic. Been there.
But by using this priority-based budget, they realized something crucial.
What's
Investing heavily upfront in a rock-solid backend, even if it meant scaling back features initially,
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
would actually let them roll out updates and new features way faster down the line.
It's that whole long game approach. Sometimes you got to sacrifice a little upfront for bigger gains later. And that actually ties into the next big idea from the article, the living budget.
Okay, a budget that pays its own bills. I'm listening.
Not quite that advanced, but it basically means recognizing that projects are always in motion. Things change, unexpected challenges pop up.
Clients changing their minds at the last minute, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And your budget needs to be flexible enough to roll with those punches. Can't be afraid to adapt.
Makes total sense. So it's not about creating this rigid document, setting it in stone, and never revisiting it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Treat it like a living, breathing thing. The article gave this example of a construction company hit with massive material price hikes out of nowhere. Global supply chain issues, you know the drill.
Oof. Yeah, that's rough. Sounds like it could have been a disaster.
It could have been, but their proactive approach saved the day. They actually factored in potential risks from the get-go and included something called contingency funds in their budget.
Contingency funds.
Yeah, basically a financial cushion, like an
Mhm.
emergency fund for your project in case unexpected costs pop up.
So they were prepared for something like this price hike?
They were. They saw it coming, or at least the possibility of it. And that foresight allowed them to absorb the increased cost without totally derailing the project.
That's brilliant. Okay, that's a living budget in action. I'm starting to see the light. But the article isn't all sunshine and roses, is it? It does mention potential pitfalls too, right?
It does. It gets real about the challenges, the things that can trip up even the most seasoned project managers. And one of the biggest culprits, scope creep.
Oh, scope creep. The silent budget killer. I know it all too well.
It's like a gremlin that sneaks into your project and starts tacking on extra work.
And you're like, but that wasn't in the original plan.
Exactly. It's uncontrolled expansion of the project requirements, and it can completely blow your budget out of the water if you're not careful.
You're renovating a bathroom, suddenly you're adding a sauna and a jacuzzi.
Perfect example. And often, scope creep goes hand in hand with another challenge,
Yeah.
poor estimation.
Yes, underestimating costs. A classic project management pitfall.
Easy to do, especially with complex projects or when you're venturing into uncharted territory. Software development, for example. Trying to accurately estimate the time and resources needed to develop a new feature.
Always tougher than it seems.
Right. You have to factor in potential roadblocks, bug fixes, those last-minute feature requests that always seem to pop up.
You know, those last-minute requests are practically a guaranteed feature at this point, at least in my experience. So we've talked about some of the challenges, but what about solutions? How do we wrangle these estimation gremlins and actually keep projects on track? The article dives into some really practical strategies for crafting a solid budget right from the start. And it all begins with a super basic but often overlooked principle, really knowing your project inside and out.
Yeah, it might seem obvious, but You'd be surprised how many projects go sideways because they skimped on clarity at the beginning.
Right. You need a shared understanding from day one.
The article really hammers home the importance of defining the project's scope, and I mean with laser precision. Think of it like building a house. You wouldn't start pouring the foundation without a super detailed blueprint, right?
Absolutely not. Chaos.
Your budget needs that same level of detail.
Makes perfect sense. But it's not just about having a clear vision yourself, right? It's about getting everyone on the same page.
100%. That's where identifying your stakeholders and actually communicating with them becomes mission critical.
So important. And the article actually takes it a step further, recommending you involve stakeholders early in the budgeting process itself. Which at first I was like, really? Get them into the weeds of spreadsheets.
I know, right? Seems counterintuitive.
But then it clicked. Getting their buy-in up front on the budget can prevent so many headaches later on. Everyone understands the constraints. Everyone's expectations are aligned.
Saves a ton of grief down the road.
Yeah.
Nothing worse than getting halfway through and having a stakeholder throw a wrench in the works because they had a completely different idea of the budget.
Totally. Nightmare scenario. But okay, let's say we've got our scope nailed down, we've looped in our stakeholders, now we're at the part many dread cost estimation. Any tips from the article on making this less painful?
It's all about breaking it down. The article emphasizes tackling those costs in smaller, more manageable chunks, instead of trying to estimate the entire project in one go, which is overwhelming.
Yeah, like trying to eat a whole cake in one bite.
Exactly. You break it down. Individual tasks, work packages, whatever makes sense for your project. Estimate costs for each of those components separately.
Much more digestible that way. And it makes me think about the article's emphasis on using historical data, which makes sense if you've run similar projects before. You can use that info to inform your estimates. But what about those times when you're doing something totally new, something innovative, no historical data to lean on? Where do you even begin to estimate costs then?
Right. That's a really common scenario, and the article addresses it head on. You don't always have the luxury of historical data, especially with cutting-edge projects.
So what do you do? Just throw darts at a board?
Well, hopefully not. Laughs. In those cases, the article recommends tapping into expert judgment. Talk to people who've worked on similar projects, even if they're not exact matches.
So leverage that collective wisdom.
Exactly. Conduct thorough market research. Look for any benchmarks you can find, even if they're not perfect.
Get creative, basically.
Exactly. It's about being resourceful and using every tool at your disposal to arrive at the most realistic estimations possible.
Because even with the best estimations, things happen. Unexpected costs pop up. And that, if I'm remembering correctly, is where the article suggests building in a contingency reserve, like that financial safety net, just in case.
Exactly. Think of it like an insurance policy for your budget.
Smart.
The article recommends setting aside about 10 to 20% of your total budget, just as a contingency. How much you set aside really depends on the project's complexity, the inherent risk involved.
Riskier project, bigger safety net.
Exactly. But having that cushion can be a lifesaver when, and it's usually when, not if, those surprises rear their ugly heads.
Sudden price hikes, unexpected delays.
Oh, and those last-minute feature requests we talked about. Yeah, those too.
It's like having that emergency credit card tucked away. Hope you never have to use it. Eternally grateful when you do. But even with the best planning, the contingency fund, things change, projects evolve, and that's where actively managing, controlling your budget becomes key. What's the article suggest on that front?
It really stresses continuous monitoring. You can't just create a budget at the beginning and then let it gather dust.
Set it and forget it. Yeah, not so much.
Exactly. You have to actively track your spending, compare it to what you budgeted for, and be ready to make adjustments as you go.
Regularly checking your bank account, making sure your spending's on track, right?
Exactly. And the article talks about something called variance analysis. Have you heard of this?
Variance analysis, it sounds a bit intimidating, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it was basically about figuring out why you're over or under budget in certain areas.
Exactly. It's like detective work for your budget. You're looking for clues to understand those discrepancies between what you plan to spend and what you're actually spending.
So if you budgeted $5,000 for marketing materials, but you've already blown through $6,000.
Variance analysis helps you figure out where that extra grand went. And it's not just about finding problems, it's about using that information to make smarter decisions going forward.
Right, so you can course correct, make adjustments.
The article really stresses that by regularly doing this variance analysis, you can catch those little red flags early.
Before they become big, scary problems.
Exactly. And ultimately, you can keep your project on track and hopefully within budget.
Makes sense. And speaking of staying on track, one thing that really struck me in the article is how it emphasizes that budgeting isn't one size fits all.
Oh, absolutely not.
Different industries have their own quirks, their own challenges when it comes to managing project budgets.
It's so true.
Mm-hmm.
The article actually does a great job of illustrating that point, too. Like in construction, for example.
Oh, yeah, good example. You've got weather delays to worry about, material prices constantly fluctuating.
And don't even get me started on change orders.
The bane of every construction project manager's existence.
They can throw even the most meticulously planned budget completely off track.
Totally. And then you've got software development, which has its own whole set of variables.
Like what?
Technology's changing so rapidly, the potential for scope creep rearing its ugly head.
And always that challenge of accurately estimating the time and resources it takes to wrangle code.
For sure. And those are just two examples. You start thinking about healthcare, manufacturing.
So many different factors can impact those budgets.
It's a lot. Thankfully, the article doesn't just drop us into this world of budgeting chaos without a lifeline.
Right. It wouldn't be very helpful, would it?
Not at all. What I appreciated is how it brought in these inspiring case studies. Companies that are out there successfully navigating these complexities, coming out on top, thanks in part to their strategic budgeting.
Yeah, the one that stuck with me was this construction company managed to complete this huge office complex, not just on budget, but ahead of schedule, too. Get out! Seriously. And they didn't just get lucky. They were meticulous with their upfront planning. They had rigorous cost control measures in place throughout the entire project lifecycle.
So they were prepared. They had those systems in place.
Exactly. They knew the potential risks going in. They were ready for them. And as a result, they didn't just survive, they thrived.
It really highlights how a well-managed budget isn't just about avoiding disaster.
It's about setting the stage for something truly exceptional.
Love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of project budgets, just kidding, we know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but what are some key takeaways, things our listeners can actually implement?
Well, first and foremost, remember that budgeting is not a one-and-done thing.
Not like ripping off a Band-Aid.
Oh, definitely not. It's an ongoing process. Embrace that idea of the living budget, the one that evolves and adapts as your project does. Stay vigilant, track your spending religiously, and don't be afraid to make adjustments along the way.
Be flexible, basically, and never underestimate the power of communication.
Couldn't agree more. Involve your stakeholders from the get-go. Make sure everyone's on the same page about the budget. Keep those lines of communication flowing throughout the entire project life cycle. Transparency is key.
So important. And I think it's key to remember, too, budgeting's not just about the numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right, it's more than that.
It's about understanding your industry, what makes it tick, anticipating those potential challenges, and being prepared.
Having that contingency plan ready to go.
Exactly. So on that note, we'll wrap up here. Think about a project you're working on right now. How can you apply these principles? Prioritizing goals, embracing flexibility, communicating clearly to really navigate the complexities of budgeting and set yourself up for success. It's worth reflecting on.
Because a well-managed budget, it's not just about crossing the finish line within budget. It's about laying the groundwork for a smoother, more successful journey from the very beginning.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, happy budgeting, everyone.